ABTOL's Brian Rolapp became the PGA Tour's chief executive in June 2025, arriving from the NFL with no prior background running a golf organization. 3 weeks into the job, he was asked publicly about the golf ball rollback and gave this answer: "No, I have not spent a lot of time on that issue. I couldn't give you an informed view 3 weeks in." That single admission set the tone for everything that followed over the next year. The rollback itself originated with the USGA and the R&A, golf's two governing bodies, who proposed a model local rule designed to reduce how far the golf ball travels at the elite level. Under the original plan, the new specifications were set to take effect in 2028 for professional golfers and 2030 for recreational players. The projected distance reduction was 13 to 15 yards for the longest hitters on tour, 9 to 11 yards for an average touring professional, and 5 to 7 yards for an average female professional. The stated justification from the governing bodies was to address concerns about golf's long-term sustainability as courses run out of room to accommodate ever-increasing distances. Reaction from the playing membership was immediate and divided. Justin Thomas said of the proposal, "It's so bad for the game of golf." Bryson DeChambeau, competing on the LIV golf circuit, described it as one of the worst moves the sport could make. Jon Rahm also spoke out publicly against the change. These reactions came before Rolapp ever took over as commissioner, meaning he inherited a fight that was already well underway. The PGA Tour's institutional position had already shifted once before Rolapp arrived. Under previous commissioner Jay Monahan, the Tour issued a memo pulling its support for the rollback entirely. In that memo, Monahan wrote that after 2 years of internally analyzing the impact of distance on the Tour, there was a widespread and significant belief the proposed rule is not warranted. Players like Tony Finau and Billy Horschel publicly backed that decision. Finau argued that the Tour should operate under its own rulebook rather than automatically adopting the governing body's proposal, stating that the Tour, taking a stand on the issue, was important for setting a precedent. Historical context matters here too. The distance debate did not begin with Rolapp or even with Monahan. As far back as 2023, ahead of that year's Masters, Tiger Woods voiced support for a rollback golf ball at the professional level, comparing the idea to how baseball uses different bats at different levels of competition and how tennis uses different balls depending on the event. Woods specifically argued that a player competing in a professional event should use a pro ball, while amateurs in amateur events should use different equipment entirely. At that stage, Woods and McIlroy were largely alone among prominent players in supporting the change, while Jon Rahm, Justin Thomas, and Sam Burns were among the players publicly opposed. This is the environment Rolapp stepped into. Rather than continuing Monahan's opposition or reversing it, he chose neither. Speaking to media at TPC Sawgrass ahead of the 2026 Players' Championship, Rolapp delivered his first State of the Tour address and was again asked to clarify the Tour's position. His answer: "We have not taken a position, we have not made our mind up with where this is." He elaborated further, framing the issue around two separate questions: whether distance is actually a problem in professional golf, and whether the specific rule being proposed would solve that problem even if it is one. During that same State of the Tour address, Rolapp outlined a broader restructuring plan built around 6 themes, targeted for gradual rollout starting in 2028. He announced plans to introduce a slate of 21 to 26 events that would carry more competitive weight than the rest of the schedule, and confirmed the Tour is moving away from the current limited field model toward field sizes of at least 120 players. He also indicated the Tour is examining whether to double the number of signature events, describing plans for a second track of PGA Tour events which will ladder up to those. On the subject of sponsor commitments specifically, Rolapp framed the competitive overhaul in commercial terms, stating in a separate comment that the Tour needs a better competitive model because we should be delivering fields to the sponsors, adding that the Tour shouldn't make them work hard to put together a field. Rolapp expanded on this reasoning in more detail during the same press conference. He explained that he had spoken with players, governing body officials, golf ball manufacturers, and fans, and that opinions were not consistent across any of those groups. On the player side specifically, he noted that tour members were already testing prototype rollback balls, with mixed results. Some players expected to be significantly affected by the change were not, while others who expected minimal impact were affected more than anticipated. Based on that inconsistency, Rolapp stated the tour would wait until it was comfortable with the rule and the data before making a final decision. By June 2026, Rolapp was still avoiding a firm commitment, but he opened the door slightly wider to alternative solutions. Speaking with reporters, he said, "Everything is on the table, including ideas that had previously been dismissed as impractical, such as a model local rule applied only to elite competitions or full bifurcation, a system where professional and recreational golfers use different equipment standards entirely." When asked directly whether bifurcation specifically was back under consideration, Rolapp did not confirm or deny it, saying only, "I think dialogue is always really productive and beneficial, especially for rules that are going to impact people who are playing the game." That comment mattered because bifurcation is exactly the outcome that Rory McIlroy has publicly and repeatedly said he prefers. McIlroy is the most prominent player on tour to openly support some version of the rollback, a position that separates him from most of his peers. When the USGA and R&A first announced the proposal, McIlroy posted a lengthy statement defending it, writing, "I don't understand the anger about the golf ball rollback." He argued the change would make no material difference to recreational golfers' scores, handicaps, or enjoyment of the game, and that it would restore certain skills in professional golf that have diminished over the past 2 decades, pointing specifically to long iron play. McIlroy was careful to clarify that his support was not unconditional. He explained that his actual preference was full bifurcation, which the governing bodies had proposed earlier before backing away from it. According to McIlroy, elite professionals and golf ball manufacturers lobbied against bifurcation because it would negatively affect their commercial interests, even though he argues the game is already effectively bifurcated in practice, since tour professionals do not play the same equipment as recreational golfers. He summarized his frustration by noting that bifurcation was the logical answer for everyone, but that commercial pressure blocked it. McIlroy has continued raising the distance issue outside of formal tour statements as well. In a conversation with Nick Faldo at Royal Birkdale, the two discussed potential solutions to increasing hitting distances, with Faldo floating an alternative approach built around limiting tee height rather than ball specifications. McIlroy has also pointed out that even a rolled-back ball may not solve the underlying problem on its own, arguing that equipment manufacturers have enough engineering resources that by the time a rolled-back ball reaches competition in 2028, the practical difference compared to current equipment could be minimal. He raised this specifically after practicing at a TGL simulator facility, describing how far he was still able to hit a driver into an indoor screen despite the pending rule change. McIlroy's position stands in contrast to the broader tour membership, much of which is sponsored by equipment manufacturers with a direct financial stake in opposing any rollback. This creates a structural tension. The players most affected by a distance rollback are often also the players contractually tied to companies that lose money if ball specifications change. That dynamic is part of why Rolapp has repeatedly declined to take a public position, despite being pressed on the issue at nearly every major press conference since taking the job. The distance question itself is not abstract. Modern equipment has pushed hitting distances to a point where some of the tour's longest players now regularly outdrive fields by significant margins, with Aldrich Potgieter ranked as the tour's longest hitter in 2025 and McIlroy ranked second. That gap in raw distance is part of what has made classic golf courses, some over a century old, increasingly obsolete for professional competition without significant modifications, since modern players can reach greens or hazards that were originally designed to be far out of range. This is the specific sustainability concern McIlroy has referenced when describing older courses becoming outdated for professional play, and it is also the underlying reason the USGA and R&A cite for pursuing a rollback rather than accepting current distance trends as permanent. Rolapp's internal tour presentations acknowledged this tension directly. During his State of the Tour remarks, he confirmed that some players hitting prototype rolled-back balls reported almost no measurable difference in their own distance output, while others reported a more significant reduction than expected. That inconsistency in player-level testing data is a central reason Rolapp has cited for withholding a tour-wide position, since a rule that affects players unevenly complicates any effort to build consensus among the membership before a formal vote or policy decision is made. While the ball rollback dominated early headlines, a second and arguably larger fight was unfolding inside the PGA Tour at the same time, a complete restructuring of the competitive schedule into a two-tier system. Rolapp unveiled this plan during his State of the Tour address, and it was formally ratified by the membership at the Travelers Championship in June 2026, with implementation targeted for the 2028 season. Under the new structure, the Tour will split into two separate levels. The top level, referred to as the Championship Series or Track 1, will include roughly 130 players competing for purses of at least $20 million per event. The second level, the Challenger Series or Track 2, will feature a larger overall player pool competing for purses of around $4 million per event. Movement between the two tiers will operate on a promotion and relegation model similar to systems used in European football, where performance over a season determines which tier a player competes in the following year. The most contentious detail inside this new system is a specific restriction. Players who qualify for Track 1 will not be permitted to drop down and compete in Track 2 events, even in tournaments that hold personal or historical significance to them. This rule became, in the words of Player Advisory Council Chairman Lucas Glover, a very, very, very hot topic during internal board discussions. Glover has been outspoken about this specific restriction because it directly affects how players like himself would prefer to build their schedules. Glover used his own experience at the John Deere Classic to illustrate the problem. He stated that he would personally choose to play in a lower-tier event for less prize money and fewer points if it meant a better chance of winning, rather than playing a Track 1 event with a larger purse but tougher competition. According to Glover, when he raised this preference with Tour leadership, he was told the restriction exists because sponsors funding Track 1 events are paying a premium specifically to guarantee the presence of top-ranked players in their fields, and allowing those players to opt into smaller events would undermine that commercial arrangement. Glover summarized the explanation directly: "It stinks, but it kind of made sense." Despite his frustration with that specific rule, Glover has publicly supported the broader restructuring. Commenting on the two-tier system as a whole, he said the Tour is heading in the right direction, while acknowledging that change is always difficult for an organization with roughly 200 playing members whose livelihoods depend on tournament access. Glover noted that significant details remain unresolved, including which specific tournaments will be classified as Track 1 versus Track 2, and that the Tour intentionally built the foundational framework early so those details could be refined before the 2028 launch. Glover also noted that he personally declined an earlier invitation to join the Player Advisory Council before later deciding to run for its chairmanship, after colleagues told him he could influence change more effectively from inside the process than by criticizing it from outside. That decision placed him directly in the middle of negotiations over both the two-tier system and a separate, related proposal to reduce the number of fully exempt Tour cards from 125 to 100 players, a change aimed at addressing pace-of-play issues tied to oversized fields. On that separate field size proposal, Glover argued the better solution was enforcing existing pace-of-play rules rather than cutting playing opportunities, noting that roughly 200 players rely on their Tour status as their primary livelihood. The Tour's senior vice president of rules and competition, Gary Young, countered that mathematical modeling of field logistics supported a maximum field size of 144 players to avoid bottlenecks on the course. The restructuring was developed primarily through the Future Competition Committee, chaired by Tiger Woods, with the Player Advisory Council involved throughout the process rather than leading it. This distinction matters for understanding where player influence actually sits inside Tour governance. The PAC functions as an advisory body that represents player interests to the board and to Tour executives, but the final structural decisions on the two-tier system were driven by the Future Competition Committee, meaning player advocacy operated within a framework it did not fully control. The stakes of this restructuring extend well beyond which players get invited to which events. Historic tournaments with long-standing sponsor relationships face the possibility of being classified into the lower Track 2 tier, which would reduce the purse money and top player exposure those events have traditionally attracted. For sponsors, tournament classification directly affects the value of their investment, since a Track 2 event without guaranteed top 130 fields is a fundamentally different commercial product than a Track 1 event. For players outside the top tier, the restructuring means fewer marquee weeks, less broadcast exposure, and sponsor dollars increasingly concentrated around a smaller group of elite competitors. Rolapp has pushed back on the idea that this creates artificial scarcity within the tour's overall product. He has also faced separate questions about whether reduced playing opportunities for mid-tier professionals undermine the tour's stated goal of rewarding season-long performance rather than a small number of headline results. These questions remain unresolved heading into the 2028 implementation window, and Rolapp has stated publicly that numerous structural details, including exact event classifications and playoff format, are still being finalized. The financial gap between the two tiers illustrates why the restriction on Track 1 players dropping down carries so much weight. A Track 1 event costs its sponsor roughly $20 million in prize money alone, a figure justified commercially by the guarantee that the top 130 players in the world will show up. A Track 2 event, by contrast, operates on a purse of around $4 million, without that same guarantee of star power. If a top-ranked player were permitted to skip a $20 million event in favor of a $4 million event that happened to hold personal meaning, the sponsor paying for the larger purse would lose the exact asset it purchased, a full field of the sport's best golfers. That is the commercial logic, Glover said was explained to him directly, and it is also the logic that makes the restriction unlikely to be reversed even though it remains unpopular with a portion of the membership. Rolapp has also had to manage this restructuring while addressing the tour's separate, ongoing playoff format. Asked whether the postseason will remain a 3-event series, he said only that, "We're actively discussing that but have not made any decisions yet," adding that whatever format survives needs to be a compelling system for fans. He has additionally faced repeated questions about whether the Players' Championship should be formally elevated to a 5th men's major, a decision he has said is not the PGA Tour's to make unilaterally, while still calling the event a really special event in its own right. Running parallel to both of these internal fights is the Tour's ongoing relationship with the DP World Tour and unresolved negotiations with LIV Golf, both of which factor into how Rolapp is managing player expectations. On the DP World Tour alliance, which currently costs the PGA Tour an estimated $90 million per year to subsidize, Rolapp has said the Tour would like to extend and deepen that partnership, stating the Tour has made a proposal to build a more mutual benefit relationship between the two organizations. On the question of a potential deal between the PGA Tour and LIV Golf, backed by the Public Investment Fund, talks have continued for more than 2 years without a finalized agreement. Rolapp has consistently declined to characterize himself as central to those negotiations, stating he is not close enough to any of those discussions to comment on their status in detail. He has instead pointed to the underlying strength of the PGA Tour's current product, citing rankings and viewership figures as evidence, and describing the signature events introduced in recent years as a huge and important progression in the sport. Asked more directly whether reuniting the sport's top players under one banner is a priority, Rolapp said the Tour already features the best collection of golfers in the world by those same metrics, while adding that his focus remains on strengthening the PGA Tour itself and only pursuing outside opportunities that further that goal. That answer drew mixed reaction from golf fans online, given that LIV Golf still features players including Bryson DeChambeau, Brooks Koepka, Joaquin Niemann, Dustin Johnson, and Phil Mickelson. Taken together, the ball rollback and the two-tier restructuring represent two distinct fights over the same underlying question: who controls the direction of professional golf, and whose interests take priority when player, sponsor, and governing body incentives conflict. On the rollback, Rolapp has avoided taking a position for over a year, even as McIlroy publicly breaks from most of his peers to support it, and the broader membership, backed by equipment manufacturer sponsorships, continues to resist it. On the two-tier system, the structural framework has already been approved and ratified by the membership, but specific implementation details, including which events fall into which tier, remain unresolved with roughly a year and a half remaining before the 2028 launch. There is also a governance dimension to this conflict that extends beyond Rolapp personally. Golf's history includes a precedent for what happens when a PGA Tour commissioner tries to assert authority over equipment rules that traditionally belong to the USGA and R&A. In the 1970s, Commissioner Dean Beman attempted to intervene in a separate equipment dispute over club grooves, a move that contributed to the eventual end of his tenure. That history is part of why Rolapp's caution on the ball rollback is notable. Taking too strong a position, in either direction, carries institutional risk that predates his time in the role. The rollback debate also intersects with a broader alignment split among golf's major organizations. Augusta National, which hosts the Masters, has aligned with the USGA and R&A in supporting the rollback concept. The PGA of America has taken the opposite position, opposing the change. The PGA Tour, under Rolapp, has occupied a middle position, neither committing to the rollback nor rejecting it outright, which effectively leaves the Tour as the organization furthest from resolution among golf's governing and membership bodies. Neither issue has reached a final resolution. Rolapp has been explicit that the Tour will not commit to a rollback position until it is comfortable with the rule and the data, without offering a timeline for when that comfort level might be reached. On the two-tier system, Glover has said the current framework was intentionally left incomplete so that details could be worked out over the coming months, meaning the specific shape of the 2028 season, including whether the restriction on Track 1 players dropping to Track 2 events survives in its current form, is still an open question for the Tour's membership. Both fights are scheduled to reach their practical deadline at the same time. The 2028 season is the target date for the rollback golf ball to take effect at the professional level, and it is also the target date for the two-tier competitive structure to launch. That overlap means Rolapp and the Tour's leadership will need to finalize positions on both issues within a similar window, even though the two decisions are being negotiated through entirely separate processes, the ball rollback through discussions with the USGA and R&A, and the two-tier system through the Future Competition Committee and Player Advisory Council. Whether those two processes land on outcomes the broader membership accepts without further public pushback remains, as of now, unresolved.